Let me start with something that always makes me smile. Every few months, someone just comes to me and confidently declares that banks don't innovate. And every time I hear that, I think, wow, that's a very relaxed thing to say, about institutions that move trillions of dollars a day without collapsing. So today I want to talk about innovation in finance, but not in the usual, fintech is good, banks is bad way, because honestly, that story is a little bit lazy. The question people love asking is, why don't banks innovate like fintechs? Which is a bit like asking, why doesn't a hospital operate like a fitness startup? Same domain, very different stakes. Innovation just isn't just about how creative you are. It's about what you are allowed to break. And in finance, breaking things is frowned upon. And here's the part that we actually don't say quite enough. Banks aren't slow. They are careful. They optimize for stability, trust, regulatory confidence, and not ending up on the front page for the wrong reasons. And that caution isn't incompetence. It's designed. Banks carry institutional memory, which is a polite way of saying they remember what happens when things go wrong. Innovation inside banks doesn't look flashy. It looks like controls, reviews, pilots, committees that meet again and again. And not exciting, but necessary. And I have, in fact, seen this with my own eyes, with my own experience. I'm saying this, that banks necessarily are not running away from innovation. People will argue that, okay, fintechs are very flashy and very innovative and stuff like that, and banks don't innovate. But that is actually not true. And this is why this episode is. If we talk about fintechs usually start their lives at the edges of the system. Lighter license, narrower scope, smaller blast radius. They can actually experiment because failure doesn't take the whole system down. That freedom isn't like a moral superiority, it's a structural positioning. So fintechs explore. Banks, on the other hand, stabilizes. And that's not a competition per se, in my opinion. That's an ecosystem doing division of labor. And when people say financial services like banks doesn't innovate, I think what they're really noticing is where innovation is allowed to live. And this is the part I find most interesting. Like, innovation is actually not dying. Innovation in finance isn't slowing down, it's relocating. It has moved to places like interfaces, workflows, abstractions, new product wrappers, and over the time, some of it flows back into the core banking space through partnerships, acquisitions, regulations, and standardization. And it doesn't happen overnight, not very loudly, but steadily. Now, which brings me another topic of agentic AI, which is right now, it has made a lot of noise in the banking and financial institutions. Agentic AI is very fascinating, not because it's autonomous, but because it forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. Who gets to decide and under what constraints? Well, most software in finance has been very passive. It waits for humans to act. Agentic systems, on the other hand, don't. They don't actually need a human intervention so often because they observe, decide, and act without any boundaries. And here's the key point. In regulated systems, boundaries are the whole story. Whether we like it or not, but it is. Agentic AI isn't about letting machines run wild. No, it's about containing that autonomy. Small decisions, clear rules, human escalation, reversibility. So in other words, experimentation without surrendering control, which is exactly the tension these core institutions care about. So, what is the subtle, shift most people are missing? Agentic AI doesn't magically make banks fast. That cannot happen. What it does is more interesting. It makes constraints very executable. So policies become logic, rules become behavior, governance stops being a document and starts being a system. And that's not disruption, that's evolution. And it suggests something very important. Innovation doesn't always need to escape institutions. Sometimes it just needs the right scaffolding to happen inside them. So maybe the better question is not why don't banks innovate like fintechs, but I think the better question is what kind of innovation belong where and why. Because innovation is not a race, it's a system. And understanding that system is how we move beyond hot takes into something more durable. Okay, so this was a spark shot from the Strategy Spark podcast. Thanks for thinking with me. And if you like this episode, please subscribe and like. It helps the algorithm. Thank you so much for tuning in.